Welcome back to the show, Cherries fans. And of course, please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button below for all of our videos. It helps this channel grow. So thank you for everybody that does that. Now, of course, we have a trip to Newcastle to meet up with a good friend in Eddie Howe. And of course, Sir Jason Tyndall as well. He is the centre of attention. He's a big character and a legend at this football club, like his, of course, God, Eddie. Um, Last time out for AFC Bournemouth, it wasn't particularly very good. We went to Craven Cottage, and one of the poorest performances of the season. Well, let's forget that Everton one, but probably one of the worst. Apart from that, this season, a 3-0 defeat at the Cottage. But we've got time to put it right. Of course, after Newcastle, we have got Man City, we've got then Leicester, and then a decent run. So there's no reason to panic at the moment. Newcastle, though, on the other hand, there's been some criticisms of Eddie recently, which has been surprising. Eddie, of course, legend here. Is he a legend at Newcastle? Well, I tell you what, let's find out. We have a special guest from the leading Newcastle podcast, the True Faith podcast, here today with us. And it is a pleasure to welcome onto Up the Cherries in all departments, John Lane. Welcome to the show, John. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, good, mate. Good to catch up.
Excellent. And thank you so much for coming on this show. So, of course, we've got to start at one place. Sir Eddie Howe, God's, he's got the keys to the city. He's got the keys to the town. To be honest, he is an absolute legend. But there has been some murmurings this season that some people are not particularly happy with him. Go on, John. Are you?
I'm really happy with him. I think what you have to do is you have to look at the context of where he came in and where we were when we came in, and we were an absolute mess of a football club at that point. Yes, the takeover had happened, but we'd had a few years of Steve Bruce, who basically every player regressed under Steve Bruce.
Yeah.
Every player got worse. And then when you can look at kind of how all those players improved under Howe, it just shows that not only is he an excellent coach, but he's obviously he's a grafter. There was a lot made about the fact that he was in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that was just like a normal thing for him.
Yeah.
But for me, he's done amazing things with our football club, and some of the players that I thought would have been long gone by now are still there, and they're still contributing. The likes of Jacob Murphy, Jamal Lascelles has had to be involved in a lot more games this year because of Botman's injury. So I'm not going to say, you can't say any manager's perfect, right? And I think I can understand at times some of the sentiment around loyalty towards certain players. Dan Burns had a couple of really bad games where he's been exposed because he doesn't have that pace, and it was all kind of being talked about in the week. Boxing Day, he got up rinsed by Elanga, basically. And then coming into Saturday, it was like, right, so if we play Dan Burn at left back, he's going to get rinsed by Elanga. And for their first goal, he's rinsed by Elanga. So it's stuff like that, I think, which frustrates some fans. But I think the other thing is people need to step back and look at the bigger picture. And the reason he played Dan Burn is he basically was, when we were in possession, Kieran Trippier was doing the old Kyle Walker or Trent Alexander-Arnold trick of playing that midfielder, and it was effectively a back three. And then when Trippier wasn't there, he was pushed out wide on the right. So again, Tino Livramento, as great a player he is and as capable he is as playing left back, he's not a left back come centre half. So he's not going to play that role. So really, you've got Dan Burn or you've got Paul Dummett, who is not of the ability of Dan Burn or anything else. So I get some of the kind of frustration if there's that feeling that there's a loyalty towards certain players. But I think you also have to take a step back and say he's doing it for a reason. And I don't necessarily think he is overly loyal. I think he will yeah, I get the sense he will be ruthless when he needs to be ruthless, and he'll make the decision he needs to make. I don't think he goes drinking with Dan Burn, therefore starts him. I think he's too obsessed with wanting to win and wanting to get the best performance out of his side.
One of the things that Eddie Howe was criticised for here was being too loyal to certain players in his squad. Players like Lise Mousset and Jordan Ibe gave numerous chances to. Ryan Fraser, again, is another one throughout that season that we was relegated. He was loyal with Fraser, even though Fraser wasn't playing at that 110%, and he even said that's what even annoyed, the Bournemouth fans, and then decided that when COVID happened, he wouldn't sign that extension. So it's something that has been labelled at Eddie Howe, but on the other side as well, because no way do I want to come across as though I'm criticizing God. He has also, taken players like Joe Linton, who, let's be perfectly honest, was absolutely terrible under Steve Bruce, and then turned them into something that is completely unrecognizable.
Steve Steve Bruce, as I said, every player regressed under him.
Yeah.
Our tactic was essentially get the ball to St Maximin and hope for the best. That was every game, and there was games I'd walk out and like I'd think, how did we get a win out of that? It was very rare that I walked out and thought, yeah, we deserved that. Like the performances were that bad. And people say the league table doesn't lie. Well, I suppose with the points over the season, it doesn't. But
Mhm.
at some point, that luck's going to run out. Um, in terms of Joe Linton and what he was like, I mean, I vividly remember I travelled down to Norwich, first away game of that season,
Yeah.
Gleeman Sunshine, and Timo Pukki scores a hat trick, and Joe Linton's probably one of the worst performances I've seen from a striker like in all my time. And I think the truth is that he wasn't a striker, was he? Because he's
No.
now so crucial in that midfield role with the physicality that he brings. Now there's a turning point. Norwich again. We played Norwich at home, and Kieran Clark gets sent off after about 10 minutes for a terrible, like, cynical foul, basically. Just, pulls the defender back. Clear red card.
Yeah.
Comes off. And Eddie's forced to put Joe Linton into midfield, and that's almost seen as that turning point, as if that hadn't happened. There is absolutely no doubt that Eddie Howe is a world-class coach because of what he gets out of these players and how he changes them. Ryan Fraser did not look like a great signing when we signed him. I thought he looks like a really good signing here. This could be
Mhm.
something that we need. There's going to be that chemistry with Callum Wilson, and so
Yeah.
I think we're all a little bit excited about that. And he turned up and he was dog shit for a while. If I'm quite honest with you,
You're
he
welcome
was
to say
useless.
that here. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah.
We're quite happy
I
you
know.
saying
I'll
that.
get some cheap likes from the Ryan Fraser hate club. And then when Howe came in, his attitude totally flipped, and I think a lot of us thought he's definitely out with Howe coming in after what happened
Mhm.
with yourselves. Now, I'm going to be really careful how I say this. I can kind of understand why he kind of maybe made the decision he made. I don't agree with the decision he made, but I can
Yeah.
understand it from a professional point of view. He's got to protect himself and all this kind of stuff, right? So, but something's clearly happened when he's come here because he basically got sent to the under-21s
Mhm.
last season, and he's been playing games again. And the rumor or the word on the street is that he basically was saying, "Well, I'm not playing enough games, and so if I'm not going to be playing, why should I be putting the work in?" And Eddie says, "Well, you're not going to put the work in. You're going to go to the reserves, and that's it." And so again, we talk about that loyalty that maybe he's sometimes shown to certain players. I think maybe he's learned from that, and he's not afraid to kind of not. I think turn heels a bit harsh, but to almost kind of say, you know what, it is actually that's not acceptable. I'm not going to put up with it.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Let's be honest, and I'm going to swear on here now. Ryan Fraser is a wanker. And, look at this. Eddie Howe created Ryan Fraser as a player. He gave him his chance in football. He gave him the platform. Ryan Fraser effectively threw it in his face, not just once at Bournemouth, but twice at Newcastle as well. So, of course, he is at Southampton at the moment, and we're kind of helping them out by sending David Brooks and Joe Rothwell. We won't go there. But, of course, going back to Newcastle, so the league form of late, around that Christmas period was not particularly very good. It seems to be that the defeats have come in fits and spells, but you have a really good run, then you have a bit of a terrible run. What do you think the cause of that is?
I mean, I'm gonna injuries, right? I'm sorry, I can't
Yeah.
avoid saying injuries. We've had probably the worst. Now, bear in mind, I think I was a season ticket holder from like the early noughties, like
Yeah.
through to about 2015, and I remember kind of during the Robson era, our injuries. We always felt like we had loads of players out. This is easily the worst kind of injury. What's the word I'm looking for? Curse, I suppose,
Yeah.
that we've ever had. To the point where there's no debate about what that starting 11 is, and actually, if you
Mhm.
look at our squad, and how many players are out, it's just ridiculous. So at the minute, I mean, we've got Nick Pope who's injured. We've got I think all our back four are there. We've got Joe Linton out now until the summer, probably maybe May. I think Pope's possibly back in March.
Mhm.
Isak and Wilson seem to take turns being injured. And and Callum Wilson, I think, as great as a striker as he's been for us, he had his 100th appearance for us the same day that Eddie Howe had his 100th game as manager, which shows you kind of how many
Yeah.
games he hasn't played for us. And then Harvey Barnes was out with some weird toe injury from when we beat Sheffield United from that game.
Mhm.
So he's only just come back into the side. Joe Willock's barely been in the side, and he can be, such an influential player for us. I can go on and on and on, but essentially we've had issues with that, coupled with the European games. We had the hardest Champions League draw that we could have wished for. When you look at it, you've got PSG, who have obviously got stars like Mbappe playing for them. You've got Borussia Dortmund and you've got AC Milan. I mean, all three of those sides got amazing history in the competition. They've all been in the final in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And they're impressive teams. So we had 6 really intense Champions League games, and basically the injuries kind of started to rack up. So we had really decent form, and then we played Dortmund at home, St James's
Mhm.
Park, and we were pretty poor that night. And that was the night that Jacob Murphy came back on, and he re-injured his shoulder.
Yeah.
Um, and Isak went off injured as well. And I don't really, from there, our form towards the end of the year was pretty poor. We were all right at home, and we were managing games. If not, we were winning them fairly comfortably.
Mhm.
We beat Arsenal 1-0. Obviously controversial goal there. We then went to your place and lost 2-0 at your place when Bruno Guimaraes had been suspended
Yeah.
because of the amount of bookings. But then we were able to beat Chelsea at home 4-1. We beat Man United 1-0 at home. And then December hit, and we really struggled through December. So Everton beat us 3-0. Spurs beat us 4-1. Our performances were terrible in those games. We didn't have a great performance at home at Fulham, but we somehow beat them 3-0. But that's the last time we won at St James's Park. So it'll be over 2 months since we've won at St James's when we play you on Saturday. And our home form was almost like we're banking on that. I think up until after that Fulham game, we'd only conceded 4 goals at home all year,
Mhm.
and we've conceded 10 in the last 3 games at home,
Yeah.
against Luton, Man City, and Nottingham Forest. So, and I don't think it's necessarily our home form's dipped, but I think we've just we've come across some of these teams, and I think with Luton especially, I think against Luton, I think we expected to turn up and win
Yeah.
almost, and I think we didn't really show them the respect they deserved. And we can't do that, and we put that right on Saturday. Got a really good result. Probably not the best performance, but we got a really good result there. But our performance against Villa was excellent, and we've won 4 away games on the bounce. Now that's the kind of momentum we really need to take into this game. We really need to be turning up and putting a show on Saturday and really boosting that confidence, because after Arsenal, we've then got Blackburn away in the FA Cup, a
Yeah.
real opportunity for us to win some silverware this year.
And I think, the view from Newcastle fans has kind of shifted a lot, that you kind of expect to get into Europe because, I think and I don't know what other people will think, but I honestly thought he was robbed against PSG
Yeah,
right at the end. Oh,
absolutely.
and, you know, personally, I think it set a precedent that Newcastle should be in Europe. I think the owners think that as well, um, but there is that other part to it, that it was such a dramatic rise from Eddie Howe. Believe it or not, I actually predicted. I had a show with Harry Redknapp, and I predicted that last season you were going to finish third, and Harry Redknapp thought I was stark raving bonkers. Of course, you finished fourth in the end, which is still really, really good.
And
Wow.
probably should have finished third because Man
Yeah,
United were shite. Like,
yeah, exactly. Um, but he set that precedent now that that's where Newcastle should be. But at the same time, there was such a rise that maybe the expectations need to be a bit lower. What would constitute at this point in time a good season in the Premier League?
in the Premier League alone, would be finished. I think if we finish in the European position, so if we qualify for Europe through the league, I think we've done
Yeah,
really well. I would, if you offered me now, I would take 17th of winning the FA Cup.
fair
Like
enough.
that's for me, like that's what matters more. I want us to see us win a trophy. I've never seen that. Obviously, I'm 38. Like we haven't won a trophy since 1969. We haven't won a domestic cup since the 1950s. So the priority for me is winning that trophy. And I think the other thing is if we're gonna become the club that we think we're gonna become, there's 2 parts of this. First of all, at the minute we're on a journey. This is probably going to be the fun bit. This is going to
Yeah.
be the bit where you kind of experience that journey towards the top. I want to kind of win the trophy whilst we're on the journey. So
Yes.
from that perspective, I like, don't get me wrong, I'm going to look forward to winning it when we're kind of expected to win it, but actually let's win it when we're kind of on that, and it's special. But also, until you win that trophy, you don't really kick on. And Man City's a really good example of that.
Mhm.
They were taken over 2008 on
Yeah.
deadline day in the summer, and then they won the FA Cup in 2011, didn't they?
Yeah.
And for me, that's the moment that kind of springboarded them into, right, actually, this is a serious club at the top, and that's, I think, what we need in our locker as well, to show that we can go and we can win and we can experience that occasion. And one quick point, so I was at the cup final last year,
Mm.
and after the game, we watched the trophy lift, and I, said to my nephews I was with, however, we've seen enough here, let's go.
Yeah.
So we were staying just north of Wembley. So we got
Mhm.
on the tube, and I kid you not, like, we were the only black and white shirts on that on that tube. All the rest were red Man United shirts. And I made a joke and said, "Oh, like, is there some sort of convention going on or whatever?" And he was like, "No, no, no. What happens is we
Mhm.
drive down and we park north just so we
Mhm.
can go at the game and come back." And I think it was a total different approach.
Mhm.
Newcastle saw that as a weekend, as a time to celebrate, a time to
Yeah.
enjoy it, and all of that. For them, it was a business trip. It was like, we're going to turn up, we're going to watch the match, we're going to lift the trophy, we're going to go home. And
Mm.
it's going to get to a point where we get to that stage. Now, I hope we don't all get to that stage, I suppose, in one way.
Yeah.
But in the other, it's a totally different mentality for the club from top to bottom. And that's the bit that we need to build.
And of course, in the EFL Cup, you overcome Man City, you overcome Man United this time round, and then went out on penalties to Chelsea. So that was really, there was an opportunity there,
Yeah.
in my perspective, that you could have won that trophy. But without a shadow of a doubt, you know, there was always this story: does Eddie Howe like a cup run at Bournemouth? You know, I could actually see you getting to the final and winning, the FA Cup if the draws are kind to you. And you are the sort of side that can go and beat Manchester City. You know, you've got that in your locker, but it's making sure you don't have that slip up like you have, in some of the games in the Premier League, effectively.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake we've made this year is we've tried to defend too many one goal leads.
Hmm.
Now, under Eddie Howe, if we go 2 goals ahead, there's only once that we haven't won the game, and that
Yeah.
was against Man City at home last season when we went 3-1 up and they drew threes each.
Hmm.
So when you look at it that way, um, our demeanor totally changes, and actually mine does now. We go 2 goals up, and I'm like, right, brilliant, won
Yeah.
this. And I almost assume it's in the bag because we don't throw away 2 goal leads, and we win those games. Now 1 goal leads this season's a very very different story. Now we did hold on Saturday, but prior to that, we've struggled all year with that.
Mhm.
And there's been times when we've literally been, as I say, we've been playing the same 11 every 3 or 4 days, and then we get to a point in the game we're like, right, we're going to have to try and defend this. And we did it against Chelsea, and we did it against PSG when, as you said before, rightly, that decision was an absolute disgrace. We did it against AC Milan. We were in control of that game. We were 20 minutes away from going to the Champions League and, the next round, and
Yeah.
we managed not to hold on there. And there's countless other games where we've had a lead and we've let it slip. I think it's something like 7 games this year where we've done that. So I think for me, that's been what the main concern is. So actually to win one of those on Saturday, although, there was part of it when I was watching it, between me, between my fingers and what have you. When we actually took the lead to go 3-2, we did look a little bit more confident. And I
Yeah.
think that's what he needs to do is he needs to get the squad to a point where we go 1-0 down, they still play with that confidence. And I know that sounds like a challenge, but and I don't know what it was like when with yourselves, but it feels to me like when Eddie Howe teams win games, they win them comfortably, they win them by a few goals. There's
Yeah.
not many 1 goal wins in there. I can think of one off the top of my head when you beat Liverpool at your place, and Ake scored in like the last minute.
Oh,
Um,
honestly, brilliant.
yeah, yeah, but I can't think of many that we've had where we've kind of scraped that 1 goal, and yes, there'll be a few there, but typically we're more of a team that get ourselves into a strong position and and play through that, and have a few goal leads, so then the jeopardy's gone.
I think, it's fair to say, actually, and we did do that on a number of occasions. I think, the first season we were in the Premier League, it was a case of getting those narrow wins. But eventually and gradually, we just got a lot more confident. The good thing with Eddie Howe was he took a team that were misfits effectively. And, that's being a little bit harsh, but you had Steve Cook, who didn't make it at Brighton, who was sold to us. You had Simon Francis that didn't make it, did make it at Charlton, but then we signed him. All these players that had been on at a lower level played their careers there. Mark Pugh from Hereford, and he gradually built this side up. And eventually, it was comfortable. It was exactly how Newcastle been seeing it. Yeah, I think probably on a lower scale because I think the quality of the player is probably not, to the level that Newcastle have got. But, definitely that, path did follow for Bournemouth. So, yeah, I think there is similarities. But one player I did want to actually mention to you, John, because he was linked. To be fair, it wasn't a January where a lot of money was spent. I think a lot of that, and as people, if they've watched the video that I spoke to Mike Gow and the situation at Reading, and of course he touched on Everton, and the thing is because of the Everton scenario, everybody's now really, really worried about overspending and putting themselves into points deductions and ramifications with transfer embargoes. But there was talk about Newcastle signing Dominic Solanke, and there was
Mhm.
talk about Callum Wilson going the other way. You know, would you have been happy with that?
Um, I think the difficulty with Wilson is Wilson's a really good player, and he's shown that.
Mm,
And I think the thing that's really impressed me about Callum Wilson is he's kind of elevated the levels as he's had to. So he
yeah.
came in, he was very much the striker to score the goals to make sure we don't go down. And then last year he was the one of the strikers to score the goals to propel us towards the top four. Um, and the, I think ultimately the biggest issue with there's two things with Callum Wilson: is his age and his
Hmm.
injury record. And I think we in the world of profit and sustainability that we're all in,
Yeah.
um, they are going to look at what those options are. I don't. I think it was really interesting because Eddie Howe was asked about it, and he said, basically he said, yeah, I signed him for Bournemouth. I've always liked Dominic Solanke. However, we can't look at players of that quality because we can't afford it,
Yeah.
essentially. So I think if he'd been offered that as a swap deal, I think you would have snapped your arm off, if I'm quite honest,
Mm,
in a lot of ways. Because I mean, as much as he likes Callum Wilson, if you're being offered Dominic Solanke and he's a younger player, he's obviously had amazing form this
yeah.
season, but it's taken a while to get there for Solanke. He
Yep.
signed a few years ago, and he didn't exactly set the world alight when he came in at Bournemouth. He obviously when he's were back in the Championship, he was quite comfortable at that level, and then it was that question: is he a Premier League striker? And it's taken him till this year under a
Mm,
different manager to show that. So, I think from a general fan perspective, if I try not, I suppose I shouldn't use this as a measuring stick, but from what I see on
yeah.
social media, some think, oh no, he's not for us, but I think we have to be really realistic about where we are at the minute. We are as I said before, we're on a journey. We're not at the top of that tree yet. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's Newcastle fans out there thinking that we're going to be signing Haaland or Mbappe or any of these star players just because the public investment fund owners, because that's not how football works under PSR. But I suppose people still have an idea of where we should be bringing players in from, rightly or wrongly. People will think, oh well, why are we signing players from Bournemouth?
Mm,
And that's not the right way that they should look at it, because I'm not, first of all, think feels like half our squad's from Bournemouth for a start. You look at like Matt Ritchie and Wilson. Obviously, we did have Ryan Fraser, and then
yes.
we've now got all the old backroom team, and it was bringing Bournemouth to Newcastle, but no, I think Solanke's had a great season, but my question would be: is it a one-season wonder he's had, or would there be a second, third, and fourth? I've not seen enough of him to make that judgment whether that's a fair comment or not. Um, but but if Eddie Howe rates him and thinks he can get the best out of him, then I would trust Eddie's judgment on that.
Hand on heart, I think you've hit the nail on the head that Solanke, when we were in the Premier League the last time round, wasn't wasn't the finished article. I think he's one of those players that has benefited from the 2 seasons in the Championship because it's got his confidence up. Last season he was good, but this season he's been outstanding. And last season he was very, very good at what he was doing, was dropping back and actually getting other players involved, like Billing, Lewis Cook. This season, he has been outstanding. Again, he's still done that, but he's also scored more as well. So I think Solanke, the talk was that Callum Wilson was going to come as a little bit to negate the price that you were going to pay for Solanke. So the figure that was being bounded round was still about 40 million. It's still a big figure, but it was a bit of a sweetener. um, I think it would have been quite a good move, and I think Eddie trusts the player and knows the player, but probably didn't get the best out of the player when he was here because he was still learning his trade.
I think the other issue as well is that we'd still then need to sell someone else.
Yeah.
We've had, as I say, we've had our worst
Mhm.
injury crisis that I can
Yeah.
remember, as I said before. So, we were. I mean, players that were linked away. Callum Wilson was linked away. I didn't realise he'd been linked as part of that Solanke
Yeah.
speculation, but he was. There was talk about Atletico Madrid at one point, and then Trippier was obviously linked with Bayern, and they'd made an offer. And it's interesting. I think some fans would have taken 15 million for Trippier, because his replacement's in the building. Like Tino Livramento was there
Yeah.
and ready to go. But I think with Kieran Trippier, you lose so much from a leadership perspective. And what he brings from that point of view. I think everything off the pitch. I think people need to remember as well. Like, this isn't FIFA. It's not Champ Man. Like, this. It's real life, and there's dynamics around the squad and how it's going to work. And you can't just go in. And Chelsea have proven that approach doesn't work. Nottingham Forest have proven that doesn't work. You've got to kind of gradually change the squad, keep
Yeah.
bringing in 3 or 4 new first team players that are going to fit into that dynamic. You lose some of the players that aren't as good along the way, but you're also going to have to, if you're going to make money through PSR or at least satisfy it, the
Yeah.
kind of players that we were linked with losing in January, the kind of players I'd kind of expect, because Almiron was another one that was linked away at one point with Saudi. Now, the word is that the Al Shabaab, they were really keen, and that we would have been happy to do the deal, but Almiron hadn't been told it was happening, and so then when it came across, through his agent, I think, at that stage he was like, no, I want to stay and I've got no interest in going, and fair play to the lad. But I think the only way we were going to let someone go in January is if then we were going to bring someone in. But if we'd brought in Solanke and lost Almiron to help fund the Solanke coming in and Wilson to help
Yeah.
satisfy that's 2 players you're losing. And, that would have been us going with just Alexander Isak, who, also I fear has, hamstrings made out of cheese strings, in the same way, until the end of the
Yeah.
season. So I think for a lot of reasons, January was difficult, but it wasn't just difficult for us. I mean, there's a lot of clubs that did nothing. Yeah, let's see what happens. But yeah, I think those kind of level of players are the kind of player. I'd be very surprised if Wilson didn't go in the summer. But I'd be more surprised if one of kind of the big hitters, like, a Botman or an Isak or a Bruno went, because ultimately, again, you go to PSR, the longer they're at your club, the lower the book price goes. The lower the
Yeah.
book price goes, the bigger the profit you make, which then allows you to reinvest. And also those players at the minute are too integral and crucial for our progress. And I think you can sell, even if we don't get into Europe this year, you can still sell we're getting the Adidas money in. You bring a couple of really good signings in. You're in a position to say, look, this is our chance to really go for the Champions League and qualify. And I think that's that's the what they need essentially, is that promise that the club's going forward and moving somewhere.
We're talking about injuries at Newcastle, and one man that I didn't think was going to get much game time this season was Matt Ritchie, but he's still going. I can't believe he's made 11 appearances. What's he been like when he's come on? Because he's an absolute legend. He's an absolute legend here. He wasn't here a great period of time, but at the same time, what he did was, outstanding.
He's got a reputation here for being a bit of an angry bastard, um, but again, leader. He's coming on and he's just replacing tired legs, and that's
Yeah.
me being really polite. He's absolutely not at the forefront of who's going to start each week. But yeah, you're right. He's going to do that, and actually, so Man City was singing Old Trafford's falling down, and I don't know if you've must have seen that viral video.
Yeah.
So Newcastle, I don't know if you're aware, Newcastle have got a version of that song now, which is Big Sven Botman at the back, Tino on the overlap, and then it's Richie's getting 10 more years. Geordie boys are on the beers, so a bit tongue in cheek, and look, I think Richie, when we signed him in the Championship, was a really important player for us that year, and again became an important player as we established ourselves back in the Premier League, and ultimately, I mean, when did we get promoted? 2017, so we've been back in Premier League 7 years now. but he was a big part of the kind of the foundation of that, and I think people appreciated his passion, that he literally puts everything on the pitch. He had some quality, and I'm not saying he doesn't have the quality anymore, but but we have to be realistic. He is an aging player in our squad, but he was admired when he, and again, he had another song which was about the fact he could have signed for West Ham, but he didn't. He signed for us, and he wanted to play for Rafa and the famous Black and White. And we're going to sing that song all night if we win the championship. So again, folk hero, I think, or cult hero, I suppose, in a lot of ways for us. But very much when he's coming on now, it is very much about just having somebody who can do some running and just kind of manage the game out, and maybe a calmer experienced head on the field just when you need it. But I'd like to see him kind of move into a coaching role with us.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to see. And I think, with Eddie and Mad Dog there, I think that allows him to kind of go in and have that kind of settled. He understands kind of what that setup's all about, with experiencing it not just at St James's but at Bournemouth as well.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard somebody say a calmer head with Matt Ritchie. But to be honest, he is one of those players who, I think, and from meeting him as well, gives everything on the pitch. I think he's learned from Paolo Di Canio. Of course, he was with him at Swindon, and there's some quite interesting stories I read about that this week as well. But he behind the scenes, I think he's somebody that youngsters will look up to, somebody who'll give that reassurance and, like you say, that calm ahead as well. One thing I did want to touch on, and this is more about the ownership. Of course, there's been a lot of criticism, and I think any club, if a Saudi consortium took over AFC Bournemouth, we wouldn't moan about it. No club in this entire country would moan about it. So let's just forget all that side of things. But at the same time, the PSR regulations now, it's not like when the Abu Dhabi consortium took over at Manchester City. You can't throw money just at it because the money is there to do it. But with that in mind, do you think that Eddie is going to be given the time, considering he's the sort of manager that will build it up brick by brick to get? And I personally do think he'll get Newcastle where you want to be season on season.
I think he's. I think he certainly gets next season. I think
Yeah.
this summer is pivotal for us. So the Adidas money is going to land this summer,
Mhm.
and I think there's some players who are going to come out of contracts, or at least be close to that. So I think that'll free up, because I think the other part is that people forget is people kept going on about what a great businessman Mike Ashley is, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy who effectively bought a house and let it depreciate, and then just basically signed extensions on things at a higher value because it was cheaper to do that than to buy a new house.
Mhm.
Um, so, and maybe I haven't quite got the analogy right, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is, when you've got players like Dwight Gale, I'll use as an example, was on, a ridiculous amount of money a week, 50, 60 grand a week, something like that.
Yeah.
Jeff Hendrick's on about 50 grand a week. He's still on the books. He's just been cut from the squad at Sheffield Wednesday. I think they're in League One now, and you can't get in the
Mhm.
squad. So you've got these scenarios with some players who have essentially, that Isaac Hayden's another one. I think he's on 40 or 50 grand a week, and he's not of the right caliber. So when some of these, like, their contracts expire, that's actually going to free up more money than people realize. And it's because it's not actually about the transfer fees; it's about being able to manage the wage structure underneath it as well. So I think it's going to be a big summer from that point of view, because we're going to be able to spend, and he's going to be able to bring in again another 3 or 4 again. None of this Chelsea and Forest bollocks where they bring in 10,
Yeah.
15, 20 players, whatever, and then they
It's
try and
ridiculous, isn't it?
offload another 10, 15 from somewhere else, usually from the academy, because that's where they get the big profit uplift.
Mhm.
So again, I think that's going to be the aim.
Mhm.
But I think if we don't look like we're going to be qualifying for Europe via the league next year, that's when his job's being called into question. If I'm
Yeah.
honest with you, and not, look, I'm a massive supporter of his and fan of his, and I'm sure that he's the right man to lead us. The UK-based members of the consortium, so Amanda Staveley and her husband Murdoch Godusi and Jamie Rubin, are behind Eddie Howe, but ultimately they have a management contract to run the football club. And 80% of the club is owned by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, and they may get to a point where they go, actually, guys, what's going on? Because you're telling me you've got this right guy in place, but actually here we are again. I think this season, if you look at this season as a whole, actually, we're not having a bad season, right? We're 7th in the Premier League. We were a Kieran Trippier slip away from getting to the semi-final of the League Cup.
Yeah.
We've got a very good chance of getting to the quarter-final of the FA Cup, and that's whilst having, as I said before, the worst injury crisis that I've ever seen is my time as a football supporter for Newcastle United. So when you add all of that together, it's incredible the job that Eddie Howe has done. Not to mention the fact that he took us from 19th in the Premier League last year and got us to stay up in a position no other team did, stayed up from the position we were in prior to that since 1992. I'm going to say, well, because I
Yeah.
don't know what the top flight history is, because no one tells me that anymore, because football didn't exist before then, apparently. And then the following year for us to qualify for the Champions League, still with some of those players from that Bruce era. I mentioned Jacob Murphy
Yeah.
before. I never thought, this is a guy that had been farmed out on loan a couple of times under previous managers. Fabian Schär, we kept being told that he couldn't play in a back four, that he could only play in a back five, and he's been such a pivotal player for us. We're playing a left centre half at left back, and most of the time he plays very well, and but he's a little bit slow at times, and that can catch him out.
Yeah.
So it's amazing the job he's done, and I laugh in the face of anybody that says that Eddie Howe's a checkbook manager, because he absolutely gets the best out of the players. And he said that when he came in. He said, if we're going to stay up, if we're going to do what we need to do, we need the squad here to be able to deliver and be able to produce what we need them to produce. And, to a man, with the exception of Ryan Fraser, they've all tried to do that to the best of their ability at every opportunity. And even the players that have left have had nothing but good words to say about Eddie Howe. The likes of Hayden, who was told pretty early, look, you're not going to be in my plans. Kieran Clark, similar. Dwight Gale was another one. Eddie Howe very quickly had conversations with the players he knew wouldn't be part of the future immediately, and just was honest with them and said, look, I think you need to try and find another club. We're going to move on. And it was received the right way because of the way that he'd been with them. So for me, he certainly deserves to start next season. And I can't think of who you would bring in that would do a better job than what him and Tyndall have done.
I completely agree. And I think, the man is a legend. I would have him back here tomorrow, albeit I
You
think
can't have him.
Iriola. Yeah. honestly, if you ever have enough of him and Iriola does let us down, which, I don't think he's going to. I think, we'll get back to winning ways sooner rather than later. I think he's going to be always welcome here. They should build a statue outside the new stadium for him. Let's call it the Eddie Howe Arena. Honestly, that is how revered Eddie Howe is at this football club. We just love the man.
I can't blame you for loving the man, right? I mean, and from what I understand, what was it? We minus 17 points in
Minus
League Two or
17
something.
points in League
Yeah,
Two.
and he got you to the Premier League, and I know he went to Burnley for a year in between there,
Yeah,
but he basically took you up to the Premier League in that time. And then what really fucking pissed me off, sorry for my language,
go for it.
is when is when there was talks that he was going to come in at Newcastle, or when he'd signed for Newcastle. There was a lot of media saying, "Oh, but he got Bournemouth relegated," and it's like, Bournemouth, you mean Bournemouth that he took from minus 17 points in League Two and then kept in the Premier League for 5 years. And the only reason you got relegated that year is because goal line technology didn't work at Villa Park one day, and that sealed your fate. So for me, I look at it and I go, "You were bloody unlucky to go down."
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way that he's responsible for you going down. If anything, it's incredible that he kept you up for 5 years. And that's to me no disrespect to you guys as a club and the players and everything else. But he worked miracles to get you where you were. So that kind of talk around, oh, he's a relegation specialist. And then the other thing that really amuses us is when people, I had Man United guy. I can't call him a friend anymore, but an acquaintance that I knew. This isn't why I don't talk to him, but I'm not getting that. But one of the things he said is, "Oh, you'll never win the Premier League under Eddie Howe. You'll have to move on from him somewhere because he doesn't have the experience." And I'm just like, "But how do you know? If you don't give someone the tools, you don't give someone a chance. How do you know?" Like you've got to, and that's why when Chelsea appointed Potter, I thought actually that's a really positive thing that they've looked
Yeah.
there and gone. Here's a manager who's performed really well. He's done a great job here. The one thing they didn't do is give him time. But again, we go back to it, don't we? You've got to give some of these managers a chance. And I'd love to see Eddie Howe lifting that Premier League trophy, the first ever English man to do it. With black and white ribbons on it. That's obviously that would be incredible. But just get me get me the FA Cup. If we don't win the FA Cup this year, get me any trophy. That's what I want. I mean, if we won the League Cup, I don't think anyone would go to work for a week.
Well, I think, Eddie, we would be absolutely delighted if Newcastle won the Premier League. It's not like we would win it, but if Eddie won it, it would be a remarkable achievement for him. A man that, let's be fair, without Eddie Howe, this club might not have existed, because if we had got relegated that minus 17 years, yeah, we already had bailiffs taking stuff out the club shop, locking the doors. It was an absolute complete and utter mess. We could have folded. We would never have got to the Premier League with Eddie Howe not coming back. He could have easily stayed at Burnley, but the rumor is that his wife didn't like it there. So hence the reason he come back, which was, a godsend for us, really. Of course, Tyndall, he works so well with him. Tyndall's not a manager, but he is a coach, and it's like the Chuckle Brothers, a probably bad example, but Morecambe and Wise, you name any duo, Torville and Dean. Without Jason Tyndall, I think that Eddie would be lost. And without Eddie, Jason Tyndall was definitely lost,
Yeah.
although I do feel that maybe he should have had a little bit more time. So this man, no wonder everybody can tell, what he means to us. And honestly, John, nobody would be happier than the Bournemouth fans. Actually, we'd probably come up there and celebrate with you, to be fair. It'd be a weekend out, wouldn't it?
Why not? Be more than a weekend, mate. I tell you, be more than a
Yeah.
weekend. No, I think in terms of Tyndall's got complete cult status up here. And you may have heard us refer to him earlier as Mad Dog. That was a term that was
Yes.
coined by our podcast, by Alex and Charlotte, and it's just there's just something about him. And there's just I can't describe what it is, but he's integral to what Eddie Howe needs, isn't he? And
Yeah.
obviously there was all the talk about the technical area rule that came in this year and how really that was a Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall rule. You've heard the Status Quo song that we sing about him, but also against Fulham we were singing Last Christmas. I'll give it to Jason Tyndall. So he really has cult status up here, and the fans love him. And he just laps it up. And he had to do the press conference the other week because Eddie wasn't very well, and he just absolutely he just nailed it. And he was asked about kind of, oh well, there's been some issues on the touchline with other managers, and he just says, "I'm just being me." He says, "I'm not going to apologise for being anyone. I'm not going to try and be anyone else. I'm going to be me, and people need to deal with that or get on with it." And yeah, we'll love him, absolutely love him.
He's a lovely man as well, Jason Tyndall. As much as everybody takes the mick out of him being centre of attention, absolutely lovely guy, top bloke. And we miss them both. We miss them both. To be honest, I think really there should be two statues. Them stood side by side. Maybe Jason would be a bit offended though if Eddie's is bigger than his. So
Yeah.
we've got to, and I do this with every opposition preview show. You know what's coming.
Yep.
We got to predict this game. So Iriola, we're going through a little bit of a bad patch. We was poor against Fulham on Saturday. Do you think we could bounce back, or do you think Newcastle will, get that home form going and, you know,
I think there's a couple of things here. So
yeah,
I think Eddie's beaten Bournemouth once since coming to Newcastle at St
yep,
James's the year that we stayed up. But I think that's the
hmm
only time, because you drew both games against us last season and obviously beat us this year at Dean Court. So coming into this game, I'll look at it and I think we've got to really we've got to turn up, and I think Eddie will have that in the back of his mind around, hang on, like I've not beaten these for a bit, and I need to kind of make sure that we're there. So we've got a week on the trip. Sorry to break this to you. We've got a week on the training ground. You know what that's like with Eddie and
yep,
Mad Dog. You know what impact that's going to have. And I think we'll turn up, and I think hopefully Luton's the lesson that we remember. We can't just turn up and expect to win, and it would be unfair to even have that opinion of you this year, because actually I think you're right. Iriola's he needed a bit of time at the start, didn't he, just to kind of find his footing. But once you beat us,
yeah,
you went on a bit of a run, and you looked a bit more solid, and that you were starting to get I suppose, the philosophy and everything else.
yes, yeah.
So I think from that point of view, you're a dangerous side, but I do fancy us to win. I think I'm going to go 3-1. I think we'll go 3-0 up, and I think Solanke gets a consolation.
I think, and honestly, I think Eddie, he, like you say, I think it was a cup game, wasn't it, that he won? If I remember correct, it was. I'm sure it was the EFL Cup game that he won last season. Of
Oh
course,
yes, there's that game as well.
yeah,
Yes, yeah. I was own goal, wasn't it? It was 1-0.
yes,
But to the other game, I've just looking at that season now and just brought them up because I thought we'd played you at St James's that year, but I must have imagined it. Yeah, it was Brighton I'm talking about. So I'm talking
yeah,
bollocks. Yeah, because you hadn't been promoted yet by that stage.
yeah.
So actually, we haven't. The only time we've beaten you, you're right, is in the League Cup.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it was big game, big game.
Yeah, I think personally, I think Eddie will struggle to break down the team. I think there's enough players that know, who are still here from Eddie's time that will know how he'll set out the team. Of course, he did study Areola as well on the timeout. So there is that element to take into it. It could go any which way, this. I honestly think it could go any which way, but I'm going to go straight down the middle. I'd be happy with a one all draw, and taking a point back down here. Um, and I think most Bournemouth fans would as well.
I think that'll be a great result for you, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
If I was a Bournemouth fan, I'd be taking a 1-1 draw before this game. I know we've had a bit of a blip at home. We haven't won at home in 2 months.
Mhm.
But before that, we were pretty ruthless.
Yeah.
We had the game against Liverpool where we were 1-0 up, and they were down to 10 men, which somehow we lost 2-1. And then after that, we just went on this run and we beat anyone that came to St James's, Brentford, Burnley, Man United, Chelsea. We beat Man City in the League Cup as well. Our home form has been really, really strong up until, as I say, the last couple of months. And one of those teams that we lost to was Man City.
Yeah.
So I think what we've got to do is we've got to we've got to use this week sensibly, which I'm sure Eddie will. We've got to focus on getting the game plan right. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he goes back to this in possession model, almost kind of with Trippier in as that extra holding midfielder, and maybe letting Bruno loose like he did against Forest. And one thing with Bruno, I think for me, if I was a Bournemouth player, I'd be winding him up and trying to get him booked, because he's one booking away from a 2-game suspension. So I think that that's what I would be doing if I were you guys. I'd be focusing on Bruno and just trying to get under his skin, really, and because he can be susceptible to maybe reacting to that. But I'd like to see Callum Wilson net against you, because we know he's capable of doing that. And again, I just think we'll have too much on the day, if I'm honest. But again, that's no disrespect to you guys. I think you're a solid team. You'll not go down this year for a lot of different reasons, but I think ultimately because of some of the standard of the teams at the very bottom of the league, you've also got a really good chance of kind of giving the cup as good a go as you can. And I think this is kind of one of my things. I think it's one of the reasons why I think the FA Cup would be a really good achievement this year as well, because teams like yourself, maybe in the past, would go, no, we're going to rest some players in this year. You're not going to go down. Why not go for it? Like give it a go and see where you go. And you've got Leicester at home, haven't you, in the next round
We
of the FA
certainly
Cup?
have.
So that's you get through that, and you're in the quarterfinals, and you get into the stage where anything can happen, really.
Do you know what? I've just had a thought.
Here we go.
Wouldn't this be brilliant if it was a Newcastle versus Bournemouth final at Wembley?
I mean, that would be incredible. I think I've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. I think if we're going to win the FA Cup, I think we need to draw Man City or Liverpool at home in the next round, because I think you have to beat one of those. I do not want to play Man City or Liverpool at Wembley. I fancy myself against any other side in the competition at Wembley, but not Man City or Liverpool. So actually to go through to get to that stage, I think you have to play them. Because again, I think Newcastle are capable at St James's of beating any team, and we showed that in October against Paris Saint-Germain, where we just absolutely played them off the park. We were absolutely sensational that night. And I mean, I've been following the side for probably the best part of 25 years, something like that, at St James's, and that was without doubt the best experience I've ever had in that ground. It was absolutely incredible.
Whereas I can rest assured say that I don't want either Liverpool or Man City. So yeah, feel free to take one of them out.
Well, we might see it at Wembley, mightn't we? I suppose.
Exactly. But John, honestly, an absolute pleasure to have you on. And before you go, do tell everybody where they can find the True Faith podcast.
So True Faith podcast is available on all free podcasting apps. We also publish those podcasts on YouTube as well. So check out our channel there. And we also do some instant reaction stuff. We also have a Patreon channel. If you are a Newcastle fan who might have stumbled upon this podcast, we charge £3 to £8 a month. £8 a month gets you all the podcast that we provide, and there's pretty much one every day, either previewing, reviewing, instant reaction, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so, yeah, if you're interested in any of that, please come along to it, and it'd be great to see you there.
Go check it out, and the link is in the description as well. But thank you again, John. Been an absolute pleasure, and no doubt we'll catch up. And all the very, very best to Newcastle. And I really do mean that. I really do mean that.
No, thanks for having us. It's been great to be on. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, mate. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember to hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here at the Cherries in All Departments. Do check out of all of our other previous opposition shows. Do check out, I did reference the chat with Mike Gow about the Reading situation. We do touch on the Everton situation there as well. So do please check that out. Do check out our interviews with Chickenhead, Of course, we had Peter Hooton from The Farm. Also, Damon Minchella last season as well. He's an Everton fan. Plus, there's loads more. So do please hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button. It does help us grow. Until the next one, up the cherries. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you for joining us.